Hey, welcome to the Glen Gauer podcast, the best podcast you'll listen to all day. Sponsored by Mission Blueprint. From movies like The Shining, The Exorcist, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the supernatural has been in the back of minds of people everywhere. In its wonder and mystery, maybe evil isn't so bad after all, right? Well, that's probably what Eve ended up thinking. Lately, evil has become funny, even cool. Look at the character Dr. Evil, played by Mike Myers, or the Joker by the late Heath Ledger. You see, evil, it's not so bad. Maybe I can even become friends with it. I mean, what has God done for me lately anyway? So, the door opens a little more. Intrigue becomes a heavyweight that turns into must. Illusion has a different light to it now, a self-interest. It insists on opportunity, a means once thought provocative moving to the norm. Maybe it's even right, and I've been wrong all these years after all. I mean, who doesn't want money and fame? With my feet on the ground, reaching to become a Hollywood star. So, I make it. That's right, all the way to the top. Why shouldn't I remind people and force the question, don't you know who I am? And all of this because of a little idea I had a long time ago. Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. So good to be with you. Hope you're having a good week. My shout out to all those in Europe listening to this Glen Gauer podcast. Some of you might know this, but my homeland is Deutschland. I've been to Germany a couple times, enjoyed the schnitzel. Hey, so today we continue, we finish a 4-part series of talking about the 4 parts of possession. You know, we talked, ladies and gentlemen, about infestation, the haunted house stuff, moving into oppression, the actual physical attack. Obsession would be next, where it moves internal from the external. And now we get into position where we move into possession. So as you know, ladies and gentlemen, I am a novice. I am not an expert in this. I find it very interesting. I think lots of people find it interesting. So what I've done is asked a good friend of mine, a very holy guy who longs to be a Green Bay Packer after all of these years, Father Jeff Norfolk. He is a priest in the Diocese of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, all-around good guy. Welcome, Father Jeff, to the show. Father Jeff, are you there?
I am. Thank you for having me.
It's so good to have you. How's the climate over there in Minnesota?
It's warm. Yeah, it's pretty soon the snow will start flying and the wind will come, but we're taking the warm weather as it's here.
Lord have mercy to us all. So anyway, Father Jeff, I've known you for a long time. You're just an all-around great guy. It was so good to have you. We're talking about possession, which may sound like a strange topic for some people. Why are you talking about possession? Because you know what? People don't know about possession. They don't even know how you become possessed and how easy it is to stay from becoming possessed. We're going to talk about some of that stuff today. So, Father Jeff, I have some questions for you. Very first question, what is it? What is possession in your own words?
Yeah, the basic way that I would define it is when evil begins to influence a person's mind and body in such a way that the evil influence takes over the person's body, takes over the person's mind.
So if they take over the person's body and mind, do they have any self-control then? Are they completely controlled by demons? Can they get up and go to work? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's my understanding that there is a way that the person can still function at a basic level on a daily basis, but there are more and more circumstances where they lose that ability to function, and they lose the ability to have control over their daily tasks and their daily life because the influence of evil has taken over so much of their life.
Right, right. When we talk about possession, most people go to one of three movies, but the big one is The Exorcist that came out in, I don't know what year, the 1970s or 60s. I'm not sure if you and I were even born then. I don't know. I have not seen The Exorcist. I refuse to watch that movie because I'll be up all night. Have you seen that movie at all?
No.
Maybe for the same reasons. I don't know, but I don't think that's really how exorcisms go. Like the movie The Exorcist, I may have seen some parts, but I don't think that's how it goes. Most people think they have someone who is possessed, they have absolutely no control over themselves. And the demons have completely infiltrated and they're like walking zombies. But that's not really true, is it?
Yeah, again, my understanding is that the person hasn't completely lost their free will or their ability to choose, but it's been deeply hindered.
Right. My really next question to that is, are there different kinds of possession? I was reading some material the other day where one of the priests who has done lots of exorcisms said, you know what, there is kind of like two kinds of possession where Protestant pastors, they can actually do a deliverance, right? Do an exorcism. But then there's another version where you gotta have a Catholic priest. Tell our listeners and viewers what you know about this.
Yeah, and I would even make a distinction that there are other non-Christian religions that have rituals where they try and expel evil influences from a person.
Oh,
so
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But specific to your question, when God wants someone's freedom, he's going to use the means that they have available to them. And so in the case of our Protestant brothers and sisters, they don't have the same means available that the Catholic Church has. And so God uses the means that they have to help bring this person to freedom. Do I believe it is a different level or a different type of exorcism than what the Catholic Church can offer through a Catholic priest? Yes, because Jesus founded the Catholic Church, and so he's given these rituals and he's given these tools for 2,000 years of history to be able to use. And so I believe there is a difference between those two kinds, between a Protestant form and a Catholic form.
Right. And we have to applaud the non-Catholics who are doing their best to help people that are dealing with demons. Kudos. But one of the questions that I get, or so I kind of feel out, are, well, what if I become possessed? Then what happens? And people have this idea that they could just become possessed by, I don't know, doing this or that. And is that really the case? Should people fear being possessed?
Well, I don't want anyone to fear unless it's the fear of God. So any kind of unhealthy fear that's not of God, that doesn't draw a person closer to God, then yeah, I don't want them to have that kind of fear. There are ways in the Catholic Church in particular, living a life of prayer, living a closeness to the sacraments. One of the challenges with this that I don't bring up to create fear, but there's what I've heard from things that I've read and exorcists that I've talked to, there's a phenomenon of someone putting a curse on another person. And so you may not be aware that that's being done, and someone does it, and then it begins to have a negative influence on your life. But again, I don't want people walking around after hearing this podcast saying, well, I wonder if someone put a curse on me, because I don't think that's a healthy fear to have. I think to be attentive to your relationship with Christ, to be attentive to daily prayer and regular reception of the sacraments, to surround yourself with people who also are living Christ-centered lives, being attentive also what you let into your mind, into your heart when it comes to outside influences like media, I believe are important aspects.
Yeah, that word media has come up in a podcast that Dennis and I have done recently. And media is a god of illusion way back in antiquity. And it's very, very interesting that you bring up media, because I was listening to Father Jim Blount, who is from SALT, Society of Our Lady of Most Holy Trinity. And he was saying, why would anybody watch TV? There's so much evil everywhere. And yet this seems to be the norm for most, I'll even say Catholic families, don't you think?
Yeah, I would say find it very rare to walk into a Catholic household and them not have a TV within their home. And even if it's not the TV, I mean, lots of people are watching things on their computer or their phone. So electronic viewing has definitely become very normalized, whether it's a TV, a computer, a phone.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're not saying you will be possessed if you use an electronic device like a computer or, I don't know, a laptop or even television. But what we're saying is there's a thing called near occasion of sin, right? And we talked about pornography last weekend. If you type the word adult into your computer, you know where you're going. And so we talked about, Father Jeff, this near occasion of sin, just stay away. And I think it was St. John Vianney who said, the victor goes to the coward when it comes to some of this media stuff. What are some of the tells, Father Jeff, that someone is possessed? Can you name just a few things that you're aware of?
Sure. Yeah, we begin to look for, does this person have a knowledge that they wouldn't normally be able to obtain in other ways? So we describe it as a secret knowledge. There's also, do they have a strength that does not come from just a human level of strength? So stories that I've heard, and even I've seen a video where you have three or four adult people holding down an adult person, and they can barely hold the person because the person who's possessed has such what we call supernatural strength. There's also a criteria where, does the person, when a sacred object is put into their presence, like a crucifix or a rosary or a priest's stole or holy water, is there an aversion to those sacred objects?
When you say, I'm sorry, when you say aversion, you mean?
Yeah, thank you. They react violently. They're repulsed. They can't be in the same room. They can't look at a crucifix because it repulses them. It becomes something that they despise.
Right. You know, I was talking to a young lady, for all intents and purposes, we'll call her Stacy. And she was telling me that when she went into the Catholic Church, she looked at a statue of St. Michael, and then she was aware that she might have been in the chapel because she talked about this gold box. And she said immediately she had intense pains and like a migraine headache. And she just had to get out of there. And I suspect this is what you're talking about, aversions to holy things, correct?
Yeah, definitely. When you walk into a holy place or you're in the presence of a holy person that you know is focused on Christ, and being around that kind of person, being around that kind of place, it makes a person begin to have adverse, both physical effects. You mentioned this physical pain inside of this woman,
right? But
also sometimes it's internal effects, emotional or spiritual things that begin to take place inside the person, in their thoughts or even feelings.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so you talked about information. They know data points that they wouldn't know, correct? You talked about, what was the next thing you said? Was it superhuman strength?
Yeah.
You're talking about pinning 2 or 3 or 4 people, pinning the person down so they could pray with them. The next thing you talked about was, I believe, aversion to holy things, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we discussed that a little bit. Is there anything else that we should be aware
So
of?
when an exorcist is looking at these criteria, he has to make a judgment that they call moral certainty. So he's not just making an uninformed decision. So he looks at these criteria, but also the person has had a psychological examination. They've had a medical doctor examine them.
Okay.
And then the priest exorcist comes in and looks at these criteria to determine, again, this understanding of moral certainty. It's not just a probability, and there's not an absolute certainty. So he's trying to get the best degree of moral certitude that he can, that this is not just something at a natural level, but there's a supernatural influence of evil that's at work in this person's life.
Right, because if you begin, I'll just use the word exercising, would that be right? A person?
Mm-hmm.
If you begin
Yeah.
exercising a person that has just psychological problems, or there's something medically wrong with them, that could create harm on a person, don't you think?
Yeah, and not only harm, again, because the person begins to believe things about themselves. And so if they believe that they're possessed and you begin to do the formal major rite of exorcism on them, you can begin to plant seeds within them that aren't going to be helpful for their healing.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying here is there's some time set aside for an investigation. So we got this guy by the name of John. He says, I think I'm possessed. You're not just all of a sudden, not maybe you, but an exorcist from a diocese. You're not, the exorcist is not going to say, well, let's just pray the prayer right now. He's actually going to do some inventory on this guy named John. He's going to have, would he have a doctor actually see him? Would that be correct? Like a medical doctor?
Yeah, that's important.
And then a psychologist, someone in the psychology world to make sure he's not just something's wrong with his mental health, correct?
Correct.
And if those two things, according to the professionals, then the priest would begin to move in with these two things in their foreknowledge and praying what is it called? There must be a certain prayer that the church prays, right? Is there a prayer that the church prays?
Sure. Yeah. So we call it a rite of exorcism, and again, it's a major exorcism versus a minor exorcism.
Oh, gosh, make a distinction for us, because I've never heard about minor exorcisms.
Sure. So a minor exorcism is, as you've spoken in your previous podcast, someone's house is being disturbed, and a priest can go in and do a house blessing that would remove, by the prayers of minor exorcism, would remove any spiritual influence, would retake that physical space back for the authority of Jesus Christ. And it's not serious enough that evil has taken over the entirety of the place, but there's some kind of influence of evil in parts of the place that a minor exorcism can regain that space for Christ.
So I could call my pastor if I think there's something going on in my house and say, hey, can you come and do a minor exorcism in my house? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and he's gonna know by doing that whether what kind of level of infestation is there. Because if he comes and he does a house blessing in prayers of minor exorcism and things continue, then he's going to have to ask himself the question of, okay, why is this persisting? Why didn't these prayers of minor exorcism take care of this particular issue?
Okay, so we have minor exorcism, and then, of course, major exorcism is what we're talking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's some question about, are these prayers prayed in Latin? Are they prayed in English? I don't know. Is there a difference? Can you speak to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've again had conversations with exorcists. In recent years, the Vatican has published a a rite of exorcism in English, and so priests are able to use it in English. The previous rite of exorcism was used in Latin, and that's still available for a priest to use. But what I understand is that a priest can choose to do it in English or Latin, and if you talk to the exorcists, you would get a little more background of whether they think one is more effective than the other, because there's definitely some opinions on that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got John here. John, he's been to a medical doctor. He's been to a psychologist. They both said no, it's neither one of these issues. And so you, Father, you take him to an exorcist. And so the exorcist assess, okay, we're going to do an exorcism. Could you kind of step through what happens? They, of course, say a formal prayer called the prayer of, I don't know, is there a name for it? I think I might have asked you that, but is it just the rite of exorcism? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, I would say the rite of major exorcism.
Okay, thank you. And so does the priest pray the prayer one time, and then is the subject, John in this case, I don't know any Johns very well, but is John then released from the demons, or is it more of the long game where he may come back and over time need more prayer? I have no idea.
Sure. So one thing, and I'm not sure if you've mentioned this in previous podcasts, but just even before the exorcist begins to pray with John, the exorcist had to get permission from his local bishop to be able to do the specific case of the rite of major exorcism with John.
Okay. No,
So-
I'm not sure if I have mentioned that, but yeah, keep going.
Okay, so evil spirits understand that they follow law, they follow authority. And so if they know that the exorcist that's doing this doesn't have the authority of the local bishop, then they don't take the prayers of the exorcist seriously. And so that local exorcist has authority in that local territory given to him by that local bishop.
Oh, so
And
you're
that's
saying
important.
a demon can resist if the proper authority isn't in place?
Correct.
Oh my goodness, that is very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, so what I've been told is that evil spirits are very legalistic, and they know the laws that they have to follow, and if those laws aren't being followed, and the proper authority isn't used by that exorcist, then they don't follow the laws and they don't follow the authority of that exorcist.
So they're still bound to authority.
Yeah, their power is very limited in the sense that the only power that they have is what God is allowing them to have. They can't have any more than that. They don't have control over God. They just
Right.
have a certain amount of control over this human person that God is allowing them to have.
Okay, so John is being prayed now by this exorcist, and what happens?
Sure. So in most cases that I'm aware of, it's not only the exorcist and John. There are a group of lay people in the room who have been invited by the exorcist to be intercessors, praying on behalf of John's freedom, praying for the exorcist himself. And you have to be able to discover a couple of things that's happening within John. Number one, how many demons are there? Very rarely is there just one. Oftentimes they come in groups. Sometimes there can be as many as hundreds. And so the exorcist is in a place of discernment. How many and what are the names? And so he's continuing to pray the prayers given to him by the church. He's using relics of saints. He's using crucifix, holy water, stole. The lay people in the room are praying many times the rosary and other intercessory prayers to help for John's freedom. And it just determines how much John is able to cooperate, because again, he still has part of his free will, and how strong of a hold these evil spirits have upon John to determine how many sessions it's going to take to be able to bring John's freedom from the number of evil spirits that are possessing him.
So you bring up an interesting point. John may get into this rite of exorcism, but he may say, you know what, this is a bunch of bunk. I'm just gonna sit here and I'm not gonna give my will over to the priest. I'm just gonna, I'm not sure how to say this, but it's not gonna happen. I'm not gonna let them do it. And the demons would stay, correct?
Yeah, John's free will has a lot to do with his freedom, and not only what he chooses during the session when he's being prayed with, but also the choices that he makes when he leaves and the session's over, how he lives his life and what he is involved in. You know, is he continuing by God's grace and the help of prayer and the sacraments? Is he continuing to work against mortal sin in his life? Is he continuing to strive for a life of holiness? Because what has been shared with me is that 90% of the work of his freedom takes place outside of the actual session of exorcism. It takes place in his daily life. It takes place in his growth in holiness.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just really important what he does outside of the session and what kind of decisions he's making about his relationship with God.
Okay, so we're in this rite of exorcism. They've been there an hour or two. How does the priest know when it's over?
Yeah, it's my understanding that things begin to quiet down a little bit, in the sense that sometimes there's visible physical manifestations, and that gives a certain awareness of what's going on within John and what has a hold on him. And at a certain point, that begins to quiet down. And depending on how much of a hold these evil spirits have on John, he may be unconscious or unaware that this is happening. And at a certain point in the time of prayer, he may come back to a consciousness and, in a way, come back to his senses of what's happening and where he's at. And then for the day, because again, you're working with human instruments and they can only handle so much of this head-to-head battle. So this session will end for a day. They'll let John go with a strong encouragement to stay close to the sacraments, and then follow up on I've heard that on a weekly basis, they'll bring the same person back each week to continue to work towards this freedom and deliverance. So, okay, on Thursday we prayed for an hour and a half. Next Thursday we'll see John for another hour and a half to keep trying to break down the resistance, to be able to name and bring freedom from whatever evil spirits are there.
So I suspect there is a progression for most people. It's not a one and done. It's probably you come back for another week, and until they're ready, or you said they have to physically be able to handle it as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very draining on the team who's praying, and it's very draining upon the priest exorcist, and it's very draining on the person who's seeking freedom. It takes a physical toll because of the spiritual turmoil that's being faced and being worked through.
All right, so John has had several sessions, and he has been exorcised by the church through the priest. He is free. What are the chances that John could be possessed again? I mean, do any of your priests that you've talked to who deal with sort of thing, do people become possessed again? I mean, it's kind of like someone who's been in jail for 20 years and that's what they know, and then they end up going back because they're more comfortable with that. Any info on that?
Yeah, I do believe that there's a danger that a person can open themselves in a way that would welcome the influence of evil spirits back into their life. And you hear the story in the gospel of the house being cleaned and evil spirits being removed from the house, and the importance of keeping the house clean. Otherwise, you not only welcome those evil spirits back, but you'll welcome even more the second time. So even Jesus himself warns against that, okay, I'm giving you what you need, in this case through the church and through the church's minister, the priest, for your freedom, for your sanctification. Now it's necessary that you keep asking me for grace on a daily basis so that you don't open yourself or get exposed to this kind of influence again.
So let's stay. Let me just move on that point that you're making about keeping our house clean. What would you tell to our listeners? If you do these things, rest assured you won't have any issues with possession.
Yeah, and again, ultimately, it's up to God. So I just want to make that caveat in that sense that because in the church's history, even some very holy people, God has allowed to experience possession.
Interesting. That sounds weird to me, though.
Sure, and again, it's not because of their own fault. It's because of what things God has allowed to happen to them. So that's where there is an important distinction that in certain instances, people open themselves up. They put themselves in dangerous risk. And in other cases, someone does something to them that brings an influence of evil into their life.
So the young girl who gets raped, or the young boy, same thing, and they're innocent, and their innocence was broken, and God allowed, they didn't choose, but God allowed it to happen. I guess that would make sense why so many young people who have been sexually abused may end up possessed.
Yeah, and another example that I've heard of is that a child is born into a family, and the family dedicates the child to Satan. The family dedicates the child to voodoo, to some kind of new age or satanic influence. Well, the child had no say in that whatsoever, but
Right.
that was brought upon them by a family influence.
Okay, so how does a normal Joe, I'm a military guy, I guess, how does a normal Joe just avoid all this?
Yeah, number one, it's important to pray every day. It's absolutely necessary in that sense, because as you grow in union with Jesus Christ, you keep your focus on him. Other distractions, outside influences that a person would expose them to that could open them to this kind of influence can be avoided. So daily prayer, frequent reception of the sacraments, in particular the Holy Eucharist, to spend time before the Blessed Sacrament in adoration and receiving the Holy Eucharist, as well as frequent confession. I suggest that people go to confession once a month and stay close to that particular sacrament, because several priests have shared with me that that's as powerful as a way to remove evil spirits as even rituals of exorcism are. So staying close to that. For me, staying close to the Blessed Mother, whether it's the Rosary, whether it's any kind of devotion to Mary, is very important as well. She's known throughout the scriptures and throughout the church's history of crushing the head of Satan. Devotion to the saints, friendship with the saints, being aware of who are your friendships, who are the people that you're surrounding yourself with, so that they're not exposing you to things that could put you in spiritual danger. Healthy dating relationship, healthy marital relationship. Those are some examples.
And what about the sacramentals, especially you non-Catholic friends of mine? In the Catholic Church, we have something called sacramentals. Father Jeff, would you explain what sacramentals are, and then how how the laity, us non-priests, can use them regularly?
They receive their name sacramental because they continue graces and offer us graces that reflect back to the sacraments. So, for example, when I have a rosary, which is a sacramental, I'm praying through the mysteries of the life of Jesus, and that points me to want to grow in love of Jesus in the Eucharist, because in the Eucharist we experience the mysteries of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, for example. So physical objects that point us to worship of God, that point us to reception of the sacraments, statues of saints can remind us, and holy objects in the home, such as statues or pictures, rosaries, the wearing of a scapular, which is a physical garment that helps bring about spiritual assistance from our Mother Mary and spiritual protection from our Mother Mary. The use of holy water is a very powerful sacramental. It reminds us of our baptism. So these physical objects, images, and created things, water, oil, again, remind us of sacraments that we've received and help us to call upon those graces from those sacraments and draw us closer to God and worship of God.
Would it be okay, me as a lay person, to put holy water in my rooms, in my house, and on my land, even daily? Would that be okay?
Yeah, definitely sprinkling holy water throughout your home. And again, setting aside your possessions. You mentioned the word land, your car, material, physical objects that you want to be dedicated to the service of God and the use only for good and holy purposes. In the case of those who are parents, mothers, and fathers, blessing their children with holy water because you have a spiritual authority in the life of your children to protect them, to help them grow in relationship with God, helping your children get crucifixes and scapulars. And I think it's a beautiful practice to encourage children to carry a rosary in their pocket, or to wear a medal of their favorite saint, asking that saint's help and protection.
One final question. If I meet someone or think I might be possessed, what should I do?
Yeah, it's important, number one, to reach out to your local priest. If I was the priest that someone went to, there are resources that I would recommend to them, books that would have prayers that could begin just in your own individual life, prayers for freedom, prayers for healing that I could recommend to a lay person. And then that local priest is going to know the priest in that diocese that's assigned by the bishop to do this specific work of investigating a case, investigating a concern that someone has of some kind of negative, evil influence in a person's life. So to start with your local pastor, let him refer you to resources, let him refer you to a particular priest who's involved in this kind of ministry.
One more final question. Have you ever been to Franciscan University?
Yes, I attended there for my undergraduate.
So this is what Father Jeff and I share. We both attended what I would say the best university in the world, as did Dr. Peter Kreeft. You know, Dr. Peter Kreeft did say, he said, the person of the 20th century is not John Paul II. It's Father Michael Scanlon. Did you know he said that?
No, I never heard that.
Yeah, he did. He said it's Father Michael Scanlon. It's very interesting. Well, that's our show today. Kudos to Father Jeff Norfolk, all the way from Minnesota. Father Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today, and have a wonderful time, and hopefully we can see you soon back in the great state of South Dakota.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I ask Almighty God to bless your listeners in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. May God strengthen the bars of your gates. Hey, thanks for listening to the Glen Gauer podcast, sponsored by Mission Blueprint. Mission Blueprint is a nonprofit ministry started by Glen and Jamie to sanctify the family. Our income is donation-based, and we need your help. Please support us financially by going to www.mission-blueprint.org and be a part of our financial team. Thank you, and may God strengthen the bars of your gate.